So maybe there's a connection, among lowering cumulative stress and learning to apply common sense. How about that? Learning to supplant split-second judging that can land us in hot water, split-second judging that is related to, the kind of lifestyle in which you're being chased by predators that could end your life. Supplanting that with common sense might run analogously to learning to reduce the occurrences of things that add to cumulative stress and to the reduction of cumulative stress. What do you think about that? This isn't what they're talking about here, but I'm coming up with it. I'm just noticing a parallel. Maybe I'm making a reasonable assumption here with respect to a parallel or a correspondence. Hey, maybe this could lead to some new way of looking at both common sense and cumulative stress. Like something that'll take care of both at the same time. Reduce cumulative stress, reduces its occurrences, occurrences that add to it, and develop common sense at the same time. What about that? Is that good creative thinking, or is that overcomplication? Well, it would be a good idea to not just jump to conclusions about that, right? But instead reflect on it a little bit. See what we can come up with here. Maybe not right here in this video, but at some point. At least the idea is now recorded, and perhaps you can pursue this line of thought for yourself that I just suggested, with this connection. But anyway, some of the things our amazing mind is capable of doing to override common sense include maintaining our own sense of reality out of proportion with identifiable reality. Well, sounds like some of the material in my Personal Evolution Part 3 video approaches this subject. Some of the Raja Yoga material, perhaps. While each of us creates a reality out of our own experiences, I'm not sure I like that terminology. It's not very good. But that's okay here. While each of us creates our perception of reality, I'm going to just add that. Maybe I should edit this. I don't know. I'm editing it as I go with you. While each of us creates a perception of reality out of our own experiences, it makes sense of the world through this personal lens. Yeah, for the most part. We understand that our sense of reality is only a small portion of a much larger picture. Yeah. Now, for some people, however, their sense of reality becomes the only sense of reality, and they believe that they can manipulate or magically transform situations to turn out the way they want them to be. In steps, irrational behavior for some, and insanity for the less fortunate. Well, that's one of the things our amazing mind is capable of doing to override common sense. Here's another one. Reflex or associative thinking. This is reactive thinking that is based simply on what we've learned through life. Reenacting learned models and applying them to each new situation as it appears, without modifying the thought processes being applied. Well, I've heard some people who are strong proponents of common sense and seem to be giving lectures on it, saying, haven't you learned anything in life? For goodness sakes, this is common sense. Haven't you learned anything in life? But apparently what's being got at here is that common sense involves modifying thought processes being applied with each new situation. Which kind of brings to question, what in the world is the word common doing in this phrase common sense? Kind of has a special use, doesn't it? I mean, if we're not talking about sense, some kind of sense that's common regardless of the situation, common across all situations. It's not common to the situations, and it doesn't appear to be very common among people. Maybe it means an ever-changing and dynamic sense, if you want to use the word sense here at all, if it even applies. Sensibility, sensory, sensing. Maybe the word reasoning would be better in here. But anyway, a form of a kind of sensibility that's used commonly in all situations, and that's dynamic, changing with each situation. And that's that dynamic sensibility, that dynamic reasoning thing, right, is used commonly in all new situations. Maybe that's the word common means here. But we seem to be losing the common thing here. The further we go, the less I'm finding that the word common applies at all. Common to what? Applying them to each new reenacting learned models and applying them to each new situation without modifying the process being applied. This type of thinking leads to errors in thinking because we refuse to push beyond standard associations formed in our mind about how things should be. When we apply what we know to present situation by reference to a similar past situation, by merely applying our mind's template without adjusting for the context, we're overriding common sense. Oh, okay. This sounds a little bit like saying that inductive reasoning gets us in trouble. Inductive reasoning is the general reasoning method used in scientific methodology, which we all apply every day to some extent or another, and in inductive reasoning, inductive inferencing, or inferring, is the way, is the reasoning method that is used by most people most of the days of our lives throughout most of the majority of each of those days. It's the kind of reasoning that says to us, we don't have to get up every morning and go out and see if the sun actually rose again just to decide whether we should go to work. We assume the sun is going to come up because it always has in the past. It saves us from having to reinvent the wheel at every turn. We look at specific cases of things, and when we, have had enough experience with a certain category of affairs in life, we come up with kind of like a general principle about those things and just apply it when we see similar situations. That's a way to describe inductive reasoning. Kind of like the way we do it if we're standing before a bin full of apples at an orchard, a bin, you know, one of them big wooden bins of apples. And we start looking at them, and the first apple is rotten. The second apple is rotten. In fact, we see that it looks like across the top of the whole bin, every apple is rotten. And we're looking at a couple of hundred apples right there without digging down in. They're all rotten, right? And we start to dig down in, and they're all rotten. After a while, let's say we get halfway down through, and they're just getting more and more rotten. We eventually say, these apples are rotten. And we go to the next bin. But hey, there might have been one down in there in the bottom that wasn't rotten. We could have been wrong. Not all the apples were rotten after all. But we come to this conclusion after examining some, after having some experience with that bin of apples, we just come to a conclusion about the whole bin of apples. That's inductive reasoning. And what they're doing here is saying, that gets us in trouble? That's not common sense? It's a little confusing, isn't it? Nailing down this thing about common sense doesn't seem to be as simple as it might at first appear. Maybe that's the whole problem with common sense. Maybe it's complicated. Maybe it's overcomplicated. In fact, maybe with all of this confusion over what common sense is and how to arrive at it is a myth. Maybe it's just a faulty construct, mental construct, a concept that just doesn't really refer to anything. What about that? And yet, many of us have certain aspects of our functioning where we seem to be a little deficient. Right? I mean, like we were just talking about a little bit ago here. Many people, I'm not going to say most, but many, I'll just be conservative about this, many people have some little area, niche of their functioning in life where they seem to fall a bit short when it comes to something like, this thing we commonly or somehow referring to when we talk about common sense. Something that we feel that we could improve upon. That could be improved upon if we could just get a grip on how the heck to do it. But while we're talking about it here, that whole idea of common sense seems to be kind of, a little bit mythical. I think, at this point. What do you think? I mean, maybe you have more common sense about this than I do. See, when we apply what we know to a present situation by reference to a similar past situation by merely applying our mind's template without adjusting for the context, we're overriding common sense. That's what this says. Even where this template is a bad fit, the insistent or biased mind just ignores the parts of the template that don't fit by trimming them off mentally and only seeing the parts that match. Okay, well, let's go back to this inductive reasoning thing. I guess maybe if, we would want to say here that what they're referring to is not a very good use of inductive reasoning. Like poor inductive reasoning. Yeah, I think that might be the case here. So this is not, an attack on inductive reasoning. It's an attack on poor inductive reasoning. And there's a lot of that goes on. There is. Okay. I don't think it would be very much in line with common sense to just condemn inductive reasoning as being the problem. That wouldn't make much sense. Well, hence it says we have our problem solved without thinking it through. That's what we end up doing. And this type of thinking tends to make us easily swayed by current popular theories and fads, such as the current tendency in some societies to control social opinion through inflating fears of germs, criminals, and terrorists, and job unavailability. Here's another thing the mind can do. Our amazing minds are capable of doing to override common sense. Here's another one. Invoking absolute certainty. Absolutist, black and white thinking about the world and others in a way that never allows space for doubt is often a cause for forgetting to apply common sense. Black and white thinking sometimes gets in the way, well, often is a cause for forgetting to apply common sense. For such a thinker, the one true way to do something is the only way, and therefore seems like common sense, even though it isn't. Well, then how do you determine what common sense is? What the common sense way is? This may, here they're talking about, for an absolutist thinker, their way of going about something seems like common sense to that person because that's the only way they see to do the thing. So to them, that's the only way, well then that's the common sense way, even though it isn't. Here's another one. Pig-headedness. That's a simple unwillingness to be wrong, ever. Founded on any number of reasons, including insecurities, fear, incomprehension, anger, fear of ridicule. Pig-headedness is the cause of many an irrational and unjustifiable decision or action. All right, well, so far now we've had familiarizing ourselves with the purpose and the meaning of common sense, and I'm not sure we've really come up with a good meaning of it. We've had understanding the ease with which the human mind is convinced that an idea is right, contrary to indicators clearly demonstrating otherwise. Moving on to number 3. Divorce yourself from reality. Well, there we go. Now there's some common sense. Oh, wait a minute. It says this isn't an invitation to insanity. Okay. Thank you. This is a request to consider that your sense of reality isn't real. Now, sense of reality. Maybe I'm overcomplicating things, but I'm a little bit of an analytic thinker. Sense of reality. You're using the word sense when, it's really kind of like a perception of reality, and there is a difference between sense and perception, right? So, should we be trusting an article that might be kind of like using the wrong word, and the word they're using is sense, and they're writing about common sense? Do they know what sense is in the first place, let alone common sense? Well, I don't know. Let's see. Let's go on. Let's move forward. What you see is what you've programmed your brain to see. Okay, let's modify that. What you see is what your brain is programmed to see. Okay, well, let's just leave out who did the programming part here. Once you start down the slippery slope of self-confirmation, that reality, perception of reality, is only ever what you see it as. You're open to the possibilities then of bigotry, selfishness, intolerance, and prejudice, because you'll constantly seek to make everyone and everything else conform to your standard of reality and your standard of what's right. Yeah. And by divorcing yourself from this one-sided reality, which is what they're getting at with their opening statement here, divorce yourself from reality, and learning as much as you can about how other people perceive the world and our place in it, you begin to make room for common sense to grow, because your sense is built on common experiences, not just your own. Ah! Now we see where the word common might start to fit in. Well, this should have been up there in number 1, right? Familiarizing ourselves with the purpose and the meaning of common sense. It wasn't until we got down here talking about divorcing from reality where I actually got any clue about what was common in the phrase common sense, what common was referring to. So let's go over it again. Let's highlight that. By divorcing yourself from this one-sided view of reality and learning as much as we can about how other people perceive the world and our place in it, we can begin to make room for common sense to grow, because our sense, whatever that means here, is built on common experiences. Whoa, okay. Now here, how to do that? Some steps, I think, are following here. Start by taking a look at your own emotions, beliefs, and practices to make sure they're not overriding your common sense. Well, how are we going to know that? If we don't yet have a good grip on common sense in a certain area of life, with respect to a certain area of life, how are we going to take a look at our emotions, beliefs, and practices to make sure they're not overriding this common sense when we're not sure what that is with respect to certain things in life? Which kind of really means backing up and getting an overview to the best of our ability. This may be a process, in progress, that the more we get a look at it, the more we have tools to actually take a look at it. Test different scenarios in your mind and try and ascertain the practical consequences of applying the decision or the action that you want to. Is it practical? Have you accounted for everything? And what will happen if things go wrong? Well, sometimes, I've done that. I think things through. I do my best. I think about the consequences. I try to take into account everything. And, there comes a time for action. You got to just go with what you got. Go with what you come up with. Or, me, I've run into this. Time's up for thinking about the whole thing. And I go ahead and I take action, and I find out that somebody else comes along with half the brains and wants to know why in the world I did such a stupid thing. And I ask, well, what would you have done? And they say, I would have done it this way. And I think, I could have had a V8. Why didn't I think of that? I put a lot of thought into this. And this person comes along, some schmuck who's has some real prejudiced views about life, some real biases, and not very good reasoning skills, which have been evident in many cases. And yet this person knew what to do in this situation where I didn't, and I gave it a heck of a lot of thought. As a matter of fact, that person, if they say, how did you arrive at this idea? There, buddy. And I tell them, they say, you think too much into it. So you see, arriving at how in the world to get this thing called common sense to apply in areas where you kind of falls a little short of it in life can be quite a challenge for a lot of reasons. I mean, just earlier here it said something about overcomplicating things. gets in the way of common sense. And now it's talking about, to get to the common sense thing to do, have you accounted for everything? What will happen if things go wrong? Is it practical? Well, that can get into a lot of overcomplicating things. Right there, I mean, that sounds a little complicated to me. Excuse me. If things go wrong, can you fix them? And if you can't, what would be the consequences? Well, good grief. You think about all of that while you're faced with a situation that you need to make a decision about in maybe about 30 seconds. That's a lot to think about. But what they're trying to do here is to give us a method, some suggestions for learning as much as we can about how other people perceive the world and our place in it, to begin to make room for common sense to grow. So this suggestion here, this suggestion about, testing different scenarios in our minds to try and ascertain the practical consequences of applying a decision or action the way we want to, like considering, is it practical? Have I accounted for everything? What will happen if things go wrong? If things go wrong, can I fix them? And if I can't, what are going to be the consequences? This would be a step, something to practice. Something to practice, okay? Not like this is the process of arriving at a common sense decision to be applied for the rest of life. Maybe this is something to practice for a while, to kind of like open the door for learning more, for being better at perceiving the world from other people's points of view, so that we can then make room for common sense to grow. And consult with others, it says. Consult with others. If your reality, perception of reality, folks, there's one reality. One. It's the actual world. And that's just manifest reality, what we call manifest reality or relative reality. The one reality is the absolute. Now, we might say, oh, but come on, geez. That's not even the topic here. We know what we're talking about. If your reality. Yeah, okay, we know what we're talking about. Then why aren't we using the right words? I mean, it's just as easy to do that. This kind of language, if your reality is clouding your judgment, we just passed that over. If your reality, well, I didn't just pass that over. I don't just pass over stuff like that when I read it. I stop and check. What did that just say? I know different. Do you know how much what this thing called the false ego and erroneous thinking, just completely out of touch with the reality, we might say, thinking there is about reality, what the self is, the world, its real nature, and our place in it, is, you know how much erroneous thought is locked up in the way we talk about it? It's so locked up in it that most people would just look funny at somebody who challenges the way something like this is worded. We should get into practice. I mean, look, this is talking about taking a look at the world and trying to get like a better view, but something more realistic. What about this idea about, your reality, my reality, and so forth? Might be a good starting point to understand that there's just one reality. And it's just relative reality. There's one absolute reality and one relative reality, which is the whole of the actual world, the universe of universes, the way it actually is. And then we have many perceptions of it. If your reality, is clouding your judgment too much, reach out and discuss the situation with others to gain wider appreciation of their perspectives and ideas. I do that a lot because I want to know. I want to know if the way I'm looking at something is the way other people are looking at it. This is most important where you are too close to a situation, and any decision or action you might take that you take might be infected by your proximity or closeness to it. All right, those are a couple of clues to kind of like open the door to allow common sense to grow. Number 4, acquaint yourself with your reflective mind. This is the part of your thinking where true common sense resides. Well, now we're getting down to some meat here. Meat and potatoes. So, common sense, true common sense, does that mean the real thing? Or as opposed to false common sense? True common sense resides in the part of your thinking called reflective mind. I guess we're just going to have to take the general spirit of that. The part that takes a bit of time out from the cleverness, the brightness, and the importance of everything rushing at you right now, and suggests that it's time to add a dose of cold water to the excitement. Reflective intelligence is about being able to stand back, get back, and view the bigger picture so that you realistically appraise the situation or environment directly around you rather than forcing yourself to conform to its suitability or practicing wishful thinking. After an accurate appraisal of the situation, a reflective mindset enables you to set goals that are realistic given the parameters you're working within. Thought I heard something weird. Didn't realize I had my window open a couple of feet in front of me here behind my curtain. There's something going on outside that I didn't expect to hear. See, that was about halfway to one of those cumulative stress building responses. That was about halfway to, ah! Might take me half an hour to recover from that car driving by out there. That was close. Close shave. After an accurate appraisal of the situation, a reflective mindset enables you to set goals that are realistic given the parameters you're working within, and to take sensible actions toward meeting them. Daniel Willingham, I don't know who that is, cites examples of people who throw money at the stock market. Throw it in there, man. Throw it. Throw money at the stock market, or people who choose unsuitable life situations as people who made decisions or took actions without using reflective thinking. He cites examples of these people who do this. He cites those examples as them being people who made decisions or took actions without using reflective thinking. Rationalizing that external signs seem fine, while ignoring complete mismatches to the person you are or the beliefs you hold is a denial of common sense. Whoa. What did that say? rationalizing that external signs seem fine. While ignoring complete mismatches to the person you are or to the beliefs you hold is a denial of common sense. Rationalizing that external signs seem fine while ignoring complete mismatches is okay. So what it's saying is that common sense would tell us that if external signs don't match up with who we are or the beliefs we hold, then we're on the wrong track. You know, that's going to take a bit of doing to kind of like work out how to turn that into anything practical. So let's just keep going here. It says, in other words, thank goodness for that. In other words, just because other people do or use something effectively isn't a sign that it will suit you too. Whew. I'm glad they explained that. In other words, just because other people do or use something effectively isn't a sign that it will suit you too. Well, no wonder people say you can't teach common sense. You can't get it from watching somebody else. I mean, that's what's being implied here. You need to put your own reflective mind to work in each situation to decide whether it will be a fit for you. Now, that seems like a bit of good advice with respect to this whole common sense thing. Just because other people do or use something effectively isn't a sign that it will suit you too. You need to put your own reflective mind to work on each situation to decide whether it will be a fit for you, your lifestyle, and those around you directly impacted by your decisions. Okay, that seems to be like a pretty good bit of advice, but how does that pair up with this idea of getting to know how other people look at and do things? Remember that from earlier? Well, I don't think earlier it was suggesting, when it said about getting familiar with how other people, you begin, when it said, by divorcing yourself from this one-sided reality and learning as much as you can about how other people perceive the world and our place in it, you begin to make room for common sense to grow because your sense is built on common experiences, not just your own. It's not saying, go do like they do. It's saying learn as much as you can about how other people perceive the world so that you can build that into your ideas about what's going to suit you in each situation and work best for you in each situation. By being able to, having this growing, opening the door to common sense, by broadening our ideas about how people in general, other people, view the world, not just how we view it ourselves. And if these suggestions are good ones here, then they are a common sense view to the whole issue. They should be. So let's ask, do these couple of suggestions that actually seem to be workable, doable, appeal to your common sense? Do less and think more. That's what it says. Do less and think more. Somebody, Simon Reynolds, says that many of us are suffering from obsessive doitis. This simply means we're obsessed with doing more all the time instead of thinking. Well, this person I talked about earlier who accused me and a lot of other people who work for him of having no common sense and suggesting, implying that he's just chock full of it, is completely obsessed with doitis. Never stops. 100 miles an hour from the moment this person gets out of bed until late at night, 7 days a week. Just takes right off at 100 miles an hour and can't stop. Just obsessive movement. Just constant. At high speed. And yet, in that person's opinion, just full of common sense. And, all those people around him just don't have any. There doesn't seem to be a lot of common sense involved in that idea. While we're running around frantically being busy all the time, we're not being productive, and we're contributing to a culture that admires incessantly busy people. Is this common sense? Hardly. It's almost kind of comical then, isn't it? Given what this just said and, the experience I'm relating to you with some other person, it's almost comical when you consider then that somebody doing that, running around frantically, being busy all the time, not really being all that productive, even though, a lot gets done because of all the intense busyness. Yeah, a lot of stuff is getting covered in a day's time, but is it really high productivity compared with what it could be? Given all these areas that are being touched on every day by this person's intense activity? No, it's actually low productivity. And this is part of this person's stress. He feels like he has to go faster and faster and faster because there's not a lot getting done. Really. Not compared to all the activity. And so this person, talk about cumulative stress. Woo! This person suffers from it terribly. And this person seems to think that the answer is to get up earlier, stay up later, and run even faster the whole time in between. And get everybody else who's under his employment to kind of like be the same way, like more, faster, 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 faster. Come on, walk with me. Let's go over here. Can't you walk faster? Come on, can't you walk? That kind of talking to people. Can't you walk? Come on. And his legs are going like, come on, let's go, let's go, let's go. You're too slow, you're too slow, you're too slow. Let's go. Just constant. Woo. And not getting a lot done. Making him feel like he has to go even faster, faster. Cumulative stress and common sense do have a link up after all. Not just as kind of like some kind of like a biological brain thing maybe, kind of like linked up to biological evolution discrepancies with social evolution. It says here, is this common sense? Just running around? This constant frantic thing that adds to our cumulative stress? I'm going to make more of a connection with this. I'm going to work on it. I'll let it incubate. And come up with something that works in connection with both. It might be something just as simple as if you learn to apply, use more common sense, you're going to reduce your cumulative stress. But, and that just kind of makes sense, right? It doesn't make common sense. It doesn't make sense, right? It's not common sense to do that. This kind of thing here, this obsession with doing more all the time. All that is about working harder and longer without taking time out to reflect. Now, do less, think more. That's what that was called. Now, here's another thing. Allocate thinking time every single day, even if it's only about 20 minutes. Well, look, here in my playlist called Personal Evolution Part 3, I did put in, didn't I put in something about a daily closure technique, including emotional closure on the day's events, as a way to, well, it accomplishes many things. Many things. One of which is a technique to reduce through life the accumulation of stress. Get things done each day, including your emotional responses. Get it done. Give things their due attention at the end of every day. And it also, is blended in with an attention training exercise, that kind of thing. Now it's being suggested here in connection with reflective mind, which is the seat of true common sense. It says allocate thinking time every single day, even if it's only 20 minutes. That 20 minutes could be the daily closure thing. The emotional closure technique, or whatever I call it. That's thinking time. And it's done with a mood of calm confidence in place. It's done from a right, most effective and most efficient, and most beneficial, and most constructive state of consciousness. The way it's all set up in the training program here, in my Personal Evolution and Achievement Training playlist, Part 3. It's not just some standalone technique that you just come up with and just do every day. No, it's done from a mood of calm confidence in place and other things in place right then and there, and them all having been developed together. So it is be a very healthy form of reflective thought every day. Reynolds suggested if you try this for 1 week, and he says at the end of it, you'll notice reduced stress levels. There it is. Connection. Cumulative stress. And he says, and your common sense will improve markedly. Connection. I knew there was a connection. Weren't we talking about that earlier here? Huh? Where was that? Up here, as soon as it said, we're human, we're fallible, and our brains work in certain ways as a means of providing shortcuts to ensure survival in a world where we're being chased by predators that could end your life. That's where I brought it up. That there was going to be a connection between cumulative stress and common sense.